Chapter 109 The Comfort of Dissociation. Yaga stood close and carefully watched Geto the moment he transformed the curse he held into a sphere. He cradled it in his hands. A tiny trickle of saliva escaped the corner of his mouth and trailed down his chin. Yaga was at the ready in case Geto moved to ingest the curse. "Geto," he called out as he placed his hand on Geto's forearm. Geto blinked a few times, then looked at Yaga's fingers circled around his wrist. He wiped his mouth and watched silently as Yaga took the curse away and locked it in a trunk before it could unravel itself. Geto tipped his chin and stared at the ceiling in frustration, his hands forming into fists. This was the second time in this session that Yaga had to stop him from consuming the curse. Yaga returned and stood before him. They looked at each other for a moment. Geto braced himself to be reprimanded. "Geto, you've got a very powerful mind," Yaga told him. Geto scoffed. "What do you mean by that, sensei?" "I don't know how much you remember from your hospital stay, but I visited you there a few times." Geto's gaze wanted to drift to the floor, but he forced himself to look Yaga in the eyes. "Your mind is so strong that it blocked out whatever it was that broke you. You held everything at bay for a long time. Whatever pain you were dealing with, your mind protected you, even when it meant you had to lose your sense of self," Yaga continued. "I'm guessing that swallowing curses is so distressing that you completely dissociate." Geto didn't want to talk about this. He began to shake. Yaga placed his hand on Geto's shoulder to ground him. "Sensei, I don't understand. If dissociation helps me complete the mission, why are you and Satoru trying to take that protection away from me?" Geto asked. "Geto, dissociation only helps you in that moment. You're putting off processing what's happening to you. It will come back to haunt you in ways that will destroy you later. The feelings of panic, rage, and shame can only be put off temporarily because you never resolve the distress you're in. Dissociation helps you avoid pain now, but it prevents you from healing later. You don't need to keep disappearing, Geto." Geto tried to blink away the tears. He didn't want Yaga to see him break down, but it was too late. He held his fists to his head and shut his eyes, trying to stop the tears from escaping. Yaga gathered his things quietly, leaving Geto alone in his frustration. Gojo was surprised to see that it was Yaga leaving the training chamber instead of Geto. He stood up from the hallway bench. "Go see Geto. I took all the barriers down, so lock yourselves in or use your veil." Yaga didn't explain any further and turned to leave, but Gojo was already inside the room, sealing the door behind him. Geto was crouched on the mats, arms covering his ears, fingers entwined behind his head. Gojo could feel his cursed energy, stinging, angry, mournful. Gojo knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his back. He had no clue why Geto was upset. He didn't know how to comfort him. Gojo kept his hand on Geto, eventually feeling his negative energy subside. Geto pulled himself up and wiped his face with his shirt sleeve. He looked over at Gojo. "Can we get the hell out of here?" Geto asked, his voice low. They stood up and gathered their belongings, silent as they left Jujutsu headquarters, the doors sealing themselves noisily behind them. They walked through the courtyard, but Gojo steered them away from the dorms and headed off campus. Geto followed, unquestioning. Gojo took them to a place he thought would bring Geto some solace, the little garden on the temple grounds. They set their backpacks on the concrete and sat on the bench. Geto leaned back, closing his eyes. Gojo let him settle and scanned the immaculate temple grounds, enjoying the silence. The constant buzz of cursed energy he was used to was almost absent here. Geto opened his eyes and shifted a little closer to Gojo, their upper arms touching. They watched as a figure in a black robe made his way out of the temple and walked down the path towards them. Gojo and Geto stood up when the priest came closer. He was young, maybe in his mid-40s. His hair was black and wavy, some strands coming out of the low ponytail at his nape. He tucked them behind his ear as he approached. Gojo and Geto bowed respectfully. The priest returned the bow and pushed his glasses higher up the bridge of his nose. I'm Saito-sensei, one of the ministers at this temple. I noticed that you've been coming to services lately and wanted to welcome you to our Sangha. Thank you, Saito-sensei. I'm Gojo Satoru, and this is Geto Suguru. Gojo and Geto bowed again. I've seen you both around for a little while now. You're always welcome here, inside or just on the grounds. People come here to meditate, some just to find peace and breathe. Saito-sensei smiled warmly. I tend to recognize most of the families who come through, though. Forgive me. Are you from nearby or just passing through for now? Saito-sensei asked. Oh, we're students at a local college. Geto tried to answer honestly without giving away too much. I see. Well, I hope you find refuge here if college life gets overwhelming and you need a place to reset, Saito-sensei told him, noting the traces of red in Geto's eyes. Gojo and Geto bowed to the priest in farewell. They watched him return to the temple. They grabbed their backpacks and slowly walked back to campus. Gojo thought about his vision of Geto in black robes, like the one Saito-sensei was wearing, and pictured the babies. He smiled for a moment until the illusion faded. At bedtime, Gojo lay back, hands behind his head. Geto was straddling him, comfortable in Gojo's lap. He was holding the onenju Gojo bought him, lost in thought. He absently fingered the beads and turned the bracelet around in his hands. Gojo just watched, observing every little twitch of Geto's fingers, the veins in his hands pulsing with each movement. Geto's lips were slightly parted, the corners of his mouth downturned into an endearing pout. Gojo untucked his hands from behind his head and clasped them around Geto's thighs. Geto glanced at Gojo, but returned to playing with his beads. Everything in this world has to balance itself out, but it still seems unfair, Geto spoke suddenly, but softly. I have to face my fears. He paused, mimicking bringing a curse to his mouth. In order to earn my peace and happiness, he finished, placing his hand on Gojo's chest. He leaned in and held the onenju close to Gojo's face, comparing the color of the beads against Gojo's eyes. Suguru, I wish you could be happy without thinking it needed to be earned. I'd give that to you if I knew how. Gojo rubbed his thumbs against Geto's thighs. Geto twisted the onenju around his wrist a few more times. He leaned down again and pressed his lips against Gojo's for a long, gentle kiss. He pulled away, gazing at Gojo's blue eyes and white lashes before giving him another long kiss. I'm so tired, Geto whispered when the kiss was over. His lips brushed against Gojo's cheek as he spoke. Rest then. I'll stay up with you until you're asleep. I'll comfort you if you have nightmares. I'll give you my body if you wake up wanting. I'm not going anywhere, Gojo told him. Geto settled in the crook of Gojo's arm. He placed a hand on Gojo's chest, over his heart, the onenju hanging loosely from his wrist. He closed his eyes, waiting for his mind to quiet, waiting for sleep, for relief from the noise in his head. Satoru is wrong. Happiness does need to be earned. So does love. I just hope I have it in me to pay the price.